Hey there, Fletcher from All Things Overlanding here, and today I wanted to talk about the importance of testing your gear, how I test my gear, and why I test my gear. I feel like a lot of us, right, we get really excited about gear that we want to buy, gear that we do buy, gear that we bring home, and then we go out on a big trip and you find out that most of it's a disaster, right? Like either you don't have the things that you need, or you forgot something, or it doesn't work with your setup the way that you thought that it would. So again, today I wanted to, on the podcast and on YouTube, kind of touch on the things that I test, how I test them, and why I test them, right? So if you want to learn more about sort of some tips and tricks to test your gear and why you should test your gear and when you should test your gear, stay tuned for more on that. All right, so as I mentioned today, I'm talking about testing gear. So let's start with, what kind of gear you should test, right? So I'm gonna start with the what, then I'm gonna move into the why, and then I'm gonna move into the how, okay? So starting with the what. Pretty much everything is my answer for that. When you're thinking about your gear, it may seem like, oh, well, my suspension's installed. I've been driving the truck around town, all week. I don't need to test that, right? I don't need to go to someplace closer to home to test that out. I can just go on that 10-hour away trip, right? I can go on this 2-week long trip without really testing my suspension, for example. Or there's just any number of things, right? It could be your suspension, it could be a vehicle modification, it could be a new chair that you got, it could be a chainsaw that you got. A really good example of one that I have right now that I have not yet tested, but I'm planning to have it be an integral part of a 2-week long trip to Canada that I'm taking in a couple months, is a water filtration system. I could just put that thing into a Plano crate, I could put it in the back of my truck, and I could wait until I'm in Canada to try and use that thing, but then I'm gonna have questions, I'm gonna run into problems, I may not have reception to Google or YouTube how to run it, or how to put this in, or how to put it together. So it's super, super important with that and all your gear to take it out and test it before you go on any sort of real longer term trip, or one where you might be in actual danger if your gear doesn't work. Right? So the gears that I test, again, is pretty much everything from small stuff to like lanterns and flashlights and that sort of thing, all the way up to vehicle modification, suspension, roof top tents, bed rack, that sort of thing. So let's move on now to the why test your gear, right? So again, there are a number of concerns that come with new gear. Some of those could be safety, some of those could be reliability. Again, like I mentioned earlier, some of those could be just knowledge of how to use the gear, right? So those are all good reasons why you should test your gear. So let's go through some examples of that. My bed rack is from Extrusion Overland. It's awesome, I love it. It's super customizable. You can mount stuff to it all over the place. I actually put that thing together, and then I went out on a trip to Hoosier National Forest, which is really close to my house, within a couple hours, and I kind of tested it out. And I got there and I realized, I was kind of looking at it and I was thinking, how am I going to mount my awning? I was thinking ahead, right? Because I needed to move my awning from my old truck to the new one. And that's when I realized, I had absolutely no idea how I was going to mount this awning to it. It just didn't make sense to me because it has channel on the back of the awning and it has channel on the extrusion rack. And so for weeks, I was like, this doesn't make any sense. There's no way to mount this thing to it. Do I need to attach my normal brackets via the extrusion, I guess, and then attach it to that? But I was like, I know that I've seen other people with it mounted in a different way. So I was like, I just need to do more research on this. So while I was out there, I tested it out. I also realized that some of my bolts were coming loose, even the ones that had been thread locked. So again, checking it over, not just assuming that everything's okay, right? But going out, taking it off-road, shaking it around, putting it through its paces and kind of testing it is super, super important. And it makes a big difference for then when I go on this longer trip, I don't have to worry about this thing falling off. So then when I got home, right, I started doing research. I started thinking about how am I going to be able to, affix this rooftop tent. I started doing research. There's an Extrusion Overland group on Facebook, which I joined, and I started, searching within that group for how people had attached them. And I saw some pictures that kind of gave me some clues on how to do that. I also, when I got home, I had noticed those bolts that were loose. I didn't have Allen wrenches with me when I was in the woods, so I got my Allen wrenches out and I went through the whole entire rack. Now there were only a couple of bolts that were loose, but I checked every single one of them, made sure they were all tightened down. And I think that's just a good thing to do, especially before a bigger trip. Is to get out there and test it out, shake it down a little bit, and then come home and test it and make sure everything's tight on a bed rack, for example. Then as far as the awning goes, I looked it up, I saw those pictures, and I finally realized that you can use these sort of triangular shaped gussets to attach that to the extrusion. So once I figured that out, I was like, oh, that's genius. But again, it took me a while. Like, it just was not clicking with me for some reason. I did not have any idea how to do this, but taking it out, testing the gear, kind of thinking about it, looking at it, checking it over, making sure everything's tight, all that stuff lent itself to me figuring out not only that some of my bolts were loose and that I needed to tighten them, but also how to then affix my awning, which now is on the truck, and I love it. It's so awesome. The brackets that come with that thing are super long, and that's another thing, right, is I could have just thrown my brackets from my previous setup on this new one, and I probably could have put a bolt down through it into a T-nut to attach it to that rack, but then it's lower. With my old brackets, that was always my problem, is I was bumping my head on the stupid awning when I go underneath of it. The extrusion rack, again, is made to lift it up. It has these bars that go up above the bed rack itself and to the side of your rooftop tent so that you can mount your awning up higher so that you don't have to worry about smacking your head on it and you can actually get some coverage with it. So again, just taking some time, thinking through it, taking it out, testing it, led me to a better decision and a better outcome than if I had just been like, I don't know, I'm just going to strap these brackets to it because it's what I got. Another good example is that water filter, right? Like, not knowing how to use that could be very dire if we get out there and the whole team is relying on that to get fresh water. If I get out there and it doesn't work, or I get out there and I forgot something important like the power cords for it or something because I didn't test it out, I didn't make sure that I knew how to use the thing, that could be very detrimental. Same goes for fridges, same goes for diesel heater. This is another great example. There have been winters where I was like, I'll just throw it on one of my portable power banks. And I get out there and it's 10 degrees and I plug it in and it's blowing the fuse in it and making it kick off because it's trying to pull too much power when it first heats up. And it won't run, right? So it took me a little bit of time with that. And I had a couple of really cold nights where I figured out, hey, this is not ideal, right? Like, this is not going to work off these power banks. I need to hook it up to my house battery and my dual battery system. That will allow it to power up and run, and then I can run it all night. I've got plenty of capacity in that battery to be able to run it. But that took a few tests. It took a few failures on my part because I didn't test to learn that and then go back and say, before I go on my next trip, let's wire an Anderson plug straight to my house battery so that I can quickly connect it, and then let's test it and let's run it in the driveway. Even though it's not winter right now, let's run it and test that thing and make sure that it works. Same could go for stoves or any number of pieces of gear that you might be taking out with you for the first time. You'd rather have a failure of like your stove or your propane setup or your hot water shower that you're trying to get to work or your diesel heater or your whatever when you're an hour from home or 2 hours from home and you could get out in the woods in 20 minutes and get to a gas station if you needed to buy some lunch or some dinner, right? Than when you're in the middle of Moab and you're out in the middle of nowhere and then all of a sudden you're suffering for days because you don't have the things that you need or you forgot them. That forgetting things is also a huge problem that I've had. And a lot of that comes from just not utilizing it enough, right? When you kind of flip over to winter and it's been all summer and you haven't really used that diesel heater, the first time I went out last year, I forgot my tube and my electrical plugs for that thing. So I had the diesel heater, I had everything else that I needed, but I didn't have the stuff to actually power the heater and run it. So I had to literally suffer through the whole night with some hot hands in my pants and pockets and just suffer through the night because I'm an idiot and I forgot that stuff. But if I had practiced and sort of run through it and made sure that I knew everything that I needed and packed it up beforehand, I would have been fine. Okay, so then finally, let's jump in this quick little episode into the how do you test, right? It could be any number of things. I've tested stuff in my backyard before. I've woken up and had funny neighbors walking their dogs looking at me because I had my truck parked in the backyard with my rooftop tent popped up in my backyard of my neighborhood. So you could do that, right? You could just do it in your backyard if you can. You could do it in your driveway. There are a lot of folks that I see on online Facebook groups and forums and things like that that literally have their whole setup pulled out and deployed in their driveway. That's really smart, actually, if you ask me, because then if you do forget something, you can run back in and get it. You right away can resolve that problem. Now, for me, I'd like to hit the woods. I like to be in dispersed camping areas. I like to be away from everybody. So I do go to my local national forest. Again, it's just a couple hours away. If I had to, I could stop and get food. If my fridge failed and I lost a little bit of food, it's probably a 1 or 2 night trip. So I'm not losing a lot. It's not like I'm ruining a lot of expensive food or steaks or anything like that, right? So that's what I typically do is I will go to my nearest dispersed camping site, which happens to be a national forest, and I will pick out a spot and then I'll get out there and I'll test setting up my chairs. I just got some new Helinox chairs that are really, really awesome that I love. But I never set them up before. And the first time I'm kind of like, how does this table work? Right? And I'm like, I had just enough reception to be able to YouTube it and look it up and kind of see like, how does this thing go together? And then I was like, oh, okay, now I got it. But again, what I probably should have done even before going out on that trip was just put it together at home. Sit in your living room while you're watching TV, put the chair together, make sure you know how to do it, or look it up, or look at the instructions, right? But so you could test your gear in your driveway, you could test it at a nearby national forest or dispersed camping location. Like I just mentioned, you could test it in your living room, you could test it in your basement, in your garage, wherever you happen to have space. You could just go in and test your stuff, right? Make sure your chair sets up, make sure that it's comfortable, make sure, I've heard of people, I haven't done this personally with the bathroom, but I have one of those fold flat portable toilets. I tested that the first time in the woods because again, I figured worst case, I'll just hold it and I'll go to a nearby gas station or something. But some people are like, they'll go into their garage and they'll test out their portable toilet, right? Just to make sure that it works, that they don't get rips in their bags, that they know how to work it, know how to set it up, and know how to utilize that system, right? Same with hot showers. I actually think that with my hot shower, I probably will not do my typical go to the national forest. That I will probably just test in my driveway. That last time that I tested my diesel heater, I did that in my driveway too, just so that if there was a problem, I could solve it right there. So just, be aware of that stuff. And again, I feel like it's kind of silly for me to say this stuff, but I have fallen into this trap multiple times. And I've also seen a ton of people post up on Facebook groups and local forums and things saying, oh my gosh, I went out and I didn't test this thing beforehand and I got there and I realized I didn't have this part of it. Or I realized that I didn't know how to start my chainsaw, for example. That's the thing that happens. Chainsaws, especially gas ones, can be kind of complex if you haven't really dealt with them before. You got to choke it, and then you got to hold the lever, and you got to do all this stuff, right? Like I had a gas chainsaw, and the first 2 times I went out camping, I couldn't use it because I couldn't start the stupid thing. But if I had just tested it at home and started it a few times and really familiarized myself with it, then those would have been better trips, and I would have been able to use that gear. So again, test your stuff, test it at home, test it in your basement, garage, living room, test it in your driveway if you want to get out and actually camp for a night, or like me, go to a dispersed campsite that's not too far away. In worst case, you suffer a little bit, but it's not the end of the world. And then you're ready for your next big trip and you get more familiar with your gear. So that was the how, the why, the what to test with your gear. Again, I hope if you are a newbie especially that this is super helpful for you. I've only been doing this for about 4 or 5 years now. I still consider myself a newbie. I have questions all the time. I make dumb mistakes all the time. So I'm just trying to impart some of the knowledge that I've learned to you guys to help you out because, again, a lot of the times this could turn people off, right? You have a really bad experience and you may not want to go again. So I'm trying to help you avoid those situations, right? I'm trying to give you a little bit of information so that you think about things before you go, and then you have a better experience when you go out. So again, I hope that was helpful for you. If it was, click that like button. If you're not already, make sure to click that subscribe button, click the bell to be notified when new videos drop. I do a podcast / vloggy kind of video like this every week, plus like a gear review or a do-it-yourself mod. I'm also a Nissan guy, so I do a lot of Nissan content on top of that stuff, sometimes more than 2 videos a week. So if that's something you're into, I would love to have you. If you're listening on the podcast, thank you for that as well. Like I said, I do one of these every single week, but if you want to see more, go over to the YouTube channel. Go down in the description and look at all my other social channels. I'm all over the place. So wherever you want to hang out, I'd love to have you. Also in the description below are links to the Patreon page. I've got a good group of folks that are in there. We have a 24/7 Discord where we all kind of chat about gear and trips and questions and things like that. And then we do a once a month call where we all get on and chat, which is a lot of fun. And then there's also the Newbie Overlanders group, which is totally free to join. It's on Facebook. If you hop over there and click through that link, you can join that and I'll let you in there. But it's just a great growing group. There's tons of people in there already sharing their rigs and their setups and their questions and their trips. So super cool place to be. And we'd love to have you there as well. But again, thanks for watching. Thanks for listening. And until next time, see you next week.